November 23rd, 1991. Evening in London. Inside a beautiful Victorian mansion called Garden Lodge in Kensington, a man sat propped up in bed, surrounded by his closest friends. He was thin, desperately, shockingly thin. His face gaunt, his body weakened by months of illness. But his eyes were still sharp, still defiant. His name was Freddie Mercury, and he had something to say to the world. For years, the tabloids had speculated, whispered, hounded him. For years, Freddie had refused to confirm or deny the rumors. But now, with death approaching, he decided it was time. His publicist released a statement. Following the enormous conjecture in the press over the last 2 weeks, I wish to confirm that I have been tested HIV positive and have AIDS. I felt it correct to keep this information private to date to protect the privacy of those around me. However, the time has come now for my friends and fans around the world to know the truth. 24 hours later, on November 24th, 1991, Freddie Mercury died. He was 45 years old. The world was stunned. Freddie Mercury, the man with the 4-octave voice, the flamboyant showman in a white tank top and yellow jacket commanding Wembley Stadium, the genius who wrote Bohemian Rhapsody and We Are the Champions, was gone. How could someone so alive, so powerful, so seemingly invincible, simply disappear? But Freddie Mercury had always been a paradox. On stage, he was fearless, larger than life, a rock god who owned every arena he walked into. Off stage, he was private, guarded, a man carrying secrets he could never fully share. He spent his whole life performing, but he died revealing the truth he'd hidden for so long. Welcome to Story Factory. I'm here to take you back through the lives of the stars who shaped our memories, the voices that filled concert halls and car radios, the artists who made us believe in magic. Today, we're opening the story of Freddie Mercury and the man behind the crown, how he hid his true self from the world, found freedom on stage, and faced death with the same defiance he'd shown his whole life. This isn't just a story about rock and roll. It's a story about identity, about shame and pride, about a man who gave the world everything but could never quite give himself permission to be fully seen. Let's go back to the beginning. Zanzibar, 1946. The island was a British protectorate off the coast of East Africa, a place of spice markets and Arab traders, of mixing cultures and colonial rule. On September 5th, in the capital city of Stone Town, a Parsi family welcomed a son. They named him Farrokh Bulsara. His parents, Bomi and Jer Bulsara, were Zoroastrians who'd emigrated from India to work for the British government. Farrokh was their first child, shy, sensitive, with enormous dark eyes and a gap between his front teeth he'd carry his whole life. When Farrokh was 8, his parents sent him to boarding school in India, to St. Peter's School in Panchgani. It was traditional for Parsi families to educate their sons in India, but for young Farrokh, it felt like exile. He was thousands of miles from home, surrounded by strict teachers and rowdy boys, lonely and homesick. But he discovered 2 things at St. Peter's that would change his life: music and performance. Farrokh learned to play piano. He formed a school band called the Hectics, playing rock and roll covers at school functions. And he discovered he loved being on stage, loved the attention, loved the way music made him feel less alone. His schoolmates started calling him Freddie. It was easier to pronounce than Farrokh, more English, more acceptable. The transformation had begun. In 1964, when Freddie was 17, revolution came to Zanzibar. The Arab Sultan was overthrown in a violent uprising. Thousands were killed. The Bulsara family fled to England, settling in the London suburb of Feltham. They had nothing, no money, no connections, just the clothes on their backs and a determination to survive. Freddie enrolled at Isleworth Polytechnic, then Ealing Art College, studying graphic design. He was intelligent, artistic, flamboyant, in a way that didn't quite fit in conservative 1960s London. He grew his hair long, wore scarves and tight jeans, hung around with musicians and artists. He worked odd jobs, hauling luggage at Heathrow Airport, selling second-hand clothes at Kensington Market. But all he really wanted was to be a rock star. He joined a few bands, Ibex, Wreckage, but nothing stuck. Until 1970, when he met a band called Smile. The guitarist, Brian May, was a brilliant astrophysicist who built his own guitar. The drummer, Roger Taylor, was handsome, talented, confident. They'd lost their lead singer and were looking for someone new. Freddie auditioned. The moment he opened his mouth, Brian and Roger knew. This wasn't just a good singer. This was something extraordinary. Freddie had range, power, drama. He could go from a whisper to a scream without losing control. He had ideas, too. Big ideas. He wanted to change the band's name, create a theatrical experience, make something no one had ever seen before. "Let's call ourselves Queen," Freddie said. It was bold, provocative, regal. Some people thought it was too much, too gay, too risky. Freddie didn't care. "It's strong, it's universal, it's outrageous," he said. "We are Queen." They found a bass player named John Deacon, quiet and steady, the perfect complement to Freddie's flamboyance, and Queen was born. Their early albums were experimental, theatrical, layered with harmonies and guitar solos. Critics didn't know what to make of them. Were they glam rock, progressive rock, opera? But audiences started to notice. There was something about Queen, something about the way Freddie moved on stage, the way he commanded attention without apology. Then, in 1975, Queen released A Night at the Opera, and everything changed. The centerpiece of the album was a song Freddie had written called Bohemian Rhapsody. It was unlike anything in rock music, 6 minutes long, no chorus, combining ballad, opera, and hard rock into one impossible, beautiful piece. The record company hated it. "It's too long," they said. "Radio will never play it," but Freddie insisted. "It's going to be huge," he told them. "Trust me." He was right. Bohemian Rhapsody became a phenomenon. The accompanying music video, one of the first of its kind, showed the four members of Queen in dramatic lighting, their faces multiplying, Freddie's image iconic and otherworldly. The song went to #1. It stayed there for 9 weeks. Queen became one of the biggest bands in the world, and Freddie Mercury became a legend. On stage, Freddie was fearless. He wore tight white pants, studded armbands, no shirt, or sometimes a leotard, or a crown, or a cape. He moved like a dancer, strutted like a peacock, commanded stadiums of 80,000 people with a flick of his wrist. He'd engage audiences in call and response, turning a rock concert into a communal experience. "Ayo," he'd sing, and 80,000 voices would answer back. It was magic. But who was Freddie Mercury off stage? In public, he played the role, the flamboyant rock star, the party animal, the man who threw extravagant parties and lived like royalty. But in private, Freddie was guarded, complicated, lonely. He was in love with a woman named Mary Austin. He'd met her in 1970, before Queen had even formed. Mary was kind, grounded, real. Freddie adored her. In 1973, he proposed. They never married, but they lived together. And for a while, Freddie tried to be the man he thought he should be. But it was a lie, and Freddie couldn't keep lying, not to Mary, not to himself. In the mid-1970s, Freddie came to terms with something he'd been hiding his whole life. He was attracted to men. He told Mary. It broke both their hearts. They separated, but they never stopped loving each other. Mary remained his closest confidant, his best friend, the person he trusted more than anyone. "You were my common-law wife," he told her. "To me, it was a marriage. We believe in each other. That's enough for me." Freddie left Mary half his estate in his will. "You would have been my wife, And it would have all been yours anyway, he wrote. But coming to terms with his sexuality didn't mean Freddie could be open about it. This was the 1970s and 80s. Rock music was aggressively heterosexual. Homophobia was rampant. Being openly gay could destroy a career. So Freddie hid. He had relationships with men in private, but in public, he kept his personal life vague, ambiguous, mysterious. It took a toll. Freddie threw himself into excess. Wild parties, drugs, anonymous encounters. He was searching for something he couldn't name, trying to fill a void that performing couldn't quite reach. His bandmates worried, but they also knew. Freddie's pain fueled his art. The loneliness, the longing, the defiance. It all poured into the music. In 1981, Queen released Under Pressure, a collaboration with David Bowie. The song was about stress, anxiety, the weight of living in a world that demanded too much. Freddie's voice soared over the bass line, vulnerable and powerful. "This is our last dance," he sang. "This is ourselves, under pressure." And then came Live Aid, July 13th, 1985. Wembley Stadium in London. The biggest benefit concert in history, broadcast to 1.9 billion people around the world. Queen hadn't been at the height of their popularity. Some critics said they were past their prime, but Freddie didn't care about critics. He cared about the performance. Queen had 20 minutes, that's all. 20 minutes to remind the world who they were. The moment Freddie walked on stage in a white tank top and jeans, the crowd erupted. He didn't need elaborate costumes or effects. He just needed his voice and 72,000 people in the palm of his hand. He strutted, he posed, he owned the stage. He led the audience in call and response, turning Wembley into the biggest sing-along in history. "Ayo!" 80,000 voices answered. Queen performed Bohemian Rhapsody, Radio Gaga, Hammer to Fall, We Are the Champions. When they finished, the crowd was on their feet, weeping, screaming, euphoric. Music historians would later call it the greatest live rock performance of all time. Freddie Mercury had reminded the world he was untouchable. But behind the scenes, something was changing. By the mid-1980s, Freddie had met a man named Jim Hutton, a hairdresser. Jim was kind, unpretentious, genuine. He loved Freddie for who he was, not for the fame or the image. For the first time, Freddie allowed himself to settle down. He bought Garden Lodge, a beautiful mansion in Kensington, filled it with art and antiques, and created a sanctuary. Jim moved in. They were together, quietly, privately. Freddie called Jim his husband. But the world outside was growing dangerous. AIDS was spreading through the gay community, killing thousands, and there was no cure, no treatment, only stigma and fear. Freddie watched friends die. He saw how the world treated AIDS patients, with disgust, with judgment, as if illness were a punishment for sin. In 1987, Freddie was diagnosed HIV positive. He told almost no one, just Jim, Mary, and a few close friends. He refused to go public. He'd spent his whole life hiding parts of himself. He wasn't going to let the world define his final chapter. Instead, he did what he'd always done. He made music. Queen went back into the studio. Freddie was getting sicker, losing weight, losing strength, but he refused to stop. "I want to record as much as I can," he told Brian May. "When I'm gone, you'll have material to work with." In 1991, Queen released Innuendo, an album that felt like a farewell. The title track was epic, operatic, filled with Spanish guitar and soaring vocals. And then there was The Show Must Go On. Brian May had written the music, but he wasn't sure Freddie could sing it. Freddie was so weak by then, barely able to stand. "Freddie, I don't know if you can do this," Brian said. Freddie looked at him. "I'll fucking do it, darling," he said. He downed a vodka, walked into the vocal booth, and delivered one of the greatest vocal performances of his career. "The show must go on," he sang, defiant, aching, true. By the fall of 1991, Freddie was dying. He could no longer hide it. The tabloids surrounded Garden Lodge, photographing him through fences, speculating, invading his privacy until the end. On November 23rd, Freddie released his statement. The next day, he was gone. The announcement of his death shook the world. Fans gathered outside Garden Lodge, leaving flowers, candles, notes. Radio stations played Queen non-stop. MTV aired a marathon of their videos. People who'd grown up with We Will Rock You and Somebody to Love tried to process the loss. On April 20th, 1992, the remaining members of Queen organized the Freddie Mercury tribute concert at Wembley Stadium. 72,000 people attended. Artists from around the world performed Queen songs in Freddie's honor. Elton John, George Michael, David Bowie, Annie Lennox. The concert raised millions for AIDS research. It was broadcast to 1 billion people, and for one night, the world celebrated Freddie Mercury. Not as a tragedy, not as a cautionary tale, but as the genius he was. Maybe you remember the first time you heard Bohemian Rhapsody on the radio, wondering how one song could contain so much: sadness, rage, beauty, absurdity. Maybe you remember stomping your feet and clapping your hands to We Will Rock You, feeling like you were part of something bigger. Maybe you remember watching Live Aid, seeing Freddie in that white tank top and thinking, that's what a rock star looks like. Freddie Mercury gave us permission to be bold, to be different, to be unapologetically ourselves. He showed us that you didn't have to fit in to be magnificent. He carried secrets his whole life, but on stage, he was completely free. In the end, Freddie Mercury was a man who loved music, loved his friends, loved life, even when life didn't love him back. He faced death the way he faced everything, with defiance, with courage, with the unshakable belief that the show must go on. Rest in peace, Farrokh Bulsara. Rest in peace, Freddie Mercury. You gave us champions. You gave us rhapsodies. You gave us magic, and we will never stop singing along. Before we close, a brief note. This story is based on publicly available information, interviews, biographies, and documentaries. Some conversations and small details have been dramatized to bring Freddie's journey to life, but the heart of his story, his talent, his struggles, his courage, and his legacy is real. If this story brought back memories, if Freddie's voice was part of your life the way it was part of mine, consider subscribing to Story Factory. We're here to revisit the legends who lit up our stages and our lives, to remember not just their fame, but their humanity. Because every legend has a story, and every story deserves to be told with respect. Thank you for listening. Until next time.